everybody. Oh man, back at ETHBerlin, I really missed this conference. I think we all miss conferences, but this one especially. So, my name's EG, I'm the co-founder of Infura. ETHBerlin is an amazing place to be, and we have some really important things to talk to you about today. A lot of great announcements to talk about, a lot of things, just like Dune was looking back at the history and the significance of ETHBerlin. We have some similar stories to tell, and can't wait to get into it. So, a little closer, all right. So we're gonna talk about some points of centralization and some paths to decentralization. So one of the things I've always enjoyed about ETHBerlin has been that ethos of decentralization. There's, just like Frederick was just talking about, there's that element of a little bit of like an anarchist spirit, a little bit of going against the grain, and that's one of the things that always strikes me when I come here and I see not just the way that people are talking about what we're doing, but the things that they're actually building and how they choose to build them. When you think about the significance of what comes out of this event, like there's a lot of great projects. Like you just heard that Dune says, we might not be here if it weren't for ETHBerlin. My favorite project that came out of ETHBerlin was the Gurley testnet. It started here, it almost won the prize, got disqualified. The people from ChainSafe did a great job with that. And when you think about why it's significant, it's because it played a significant part in the ETH2 transition and the merge. So especially this week, it's really great to highlight that merge really depended on the Gurley testnet during its development, and maybe the merge might not have happened if not for ETHBerlin. So think about that. So in terms of points of centralization, and being Infura, we can talk a bit about centralization. That we can start with the obvious ones: fiat on-ramps, off-ramps, and centralized exchanges. When we're talking about how we care about decentralization, and decentralization means many things to many people and slightly different things. Like this is one of the things that we have to consider. Like when we're looking at the technologies that we're building, how we're building the applications, like the users that you're trying to attract into your applications start here. And what are the integration points that you're picking? And those partners that you're working with and integrating into the application, what's their approach to doing business? Because it's not just about the features that they offer, the features that they provide, it's also like their ethos and where you feel like that company or that product will be in 5 years and 10 years, and is it going to be a company that's like fighting with you to try to change the status quo? We live in the current state of the world. We live in the current state of the world, and things aren't always, regulations or other laws aren't always exactly what we feel like they should be. And some people like to work against the system, outside of the system. Some people try to work within it. And it's something to consider as you're picking your partners and the different products that you use. Then, of course, we can talk about the code repositories and the importance of the intellectual property that we're creating, like whether that's Creative Commons intellectual property, however you decide to license it, like that knowledge is going to have to live somewhere, and it's typically GitHub for all of us. And we've seen what impacts that can have with risk of censorship and even something as simple as data loss or security breaches. Like just today, there was a significant security breach at Uber, and what's the impact of the choices that we make when we consider where our code lives? Then there's what I call off-chain data troves. And when I call out these or mention these projects, I'm not calling them out and saying they're bad. I'm saying they're great and they're extremely useful, and they approach things in a way that solves people's problems, but they're what I call centralized off-chain data troves, because it's not something that's replicated easily by an individual. So whether that's Etherscan, and where we all go typically to look at our transaction information, or it's a MEV Explorer to take a look at what's happening in the pending transaction pool data, or doing something more complex with some analytics queries to understand transaction activity on chain with Dune or with Nonsen or some other types of services. Those are things that we rely on, and what would we do if those things didn't exist? Or if we were going to try to improve those products to be something that was a little bit more decentralized, what would it mean for that product? Because it's not always going to mean the same type of solution. I like also thinking about that progressive path of decentralization when it comes to layer 2s and rollups. Layer 2s were essential in the last couple of years because it solves the problem of transaction throughput and the crazy transaction fees that nobody liked. Now that we have layer 2s, do we say, are they purely decentralized? And most of them are not yet. Most of them have said they're going to start with having a centralized sequencer rolling up transactions, and then at some point in the future, they'll find a path towards decentralizing that and making a full decentralized protocol. I love that approach because it solves the immediate problem, makes the system usable, and is a commitment to the ecosystem of continuing to improve on the path of decentralization. Another one, of course, is bridges. We all know that bridges are centralized, but centralized in a different way, because you can have multi-authority bridges where is it still considered centralized or decentralized if you have a single bridge that assets are flowing through, but there's 4 different parties that need to attest to information flowing through that bridge? Or what if it was 40? Is that decentralized enough? If it's not, what if it's permissionless and anybody can start their own bridge? Or it's a bridge governed by a DAO and there's now 16 of them. Is that decentralized enough? I could go on with the types of questions with this, but it's something that I always think about because Infura gets a lot of questions about our opinions on centralization. And so whenever I look at things, I think, how could that be decentralized or more decentralized? So here's the elephant in the room one. Here's the guy from Infura talking to you about how to be decentralized. And so when we started in 2016, the decentralized solution for connecting to the chain was running your own node. So we didn't feel like we had to create a solution for that. The solution that we created was supposed to be solving the problem of getting more users into the space. We probably couldn't fill this room with the amount of users that were trying like really meaningful dApps and applications at like early 2016. And so we said we were going to start with a centralized service to do that. And the reason that we did that was because to be able to serve things at scale and make it profitable enough, or not even profitable because we didn't charge at the time, sustainable enough, keep those costs low enough, we had to keep it centralized, do like traditional database indexing and caching and all of like the cloud scalability tricks that you use in Web 2 to be able to run Infura. When you think about all of the ICO activity through like 2017, we weren't a paid service at the time. We were just this free public endpoint that was out there. And I remember whether it was the Gnosis token sale, the EOS token sale, any token that sits in your portfolio that launched in 2017 was typically hitting Infura. And we had to solve the immediate problem of scaling that, and it's a much easier problem to solve when you solve it in that traditional centralized way. And that's what we chose to do, was other people are working on hard decentralization and complex research problems. We're going to solve this fairly straightforward one and keep the ecosystem going and growing. But now fast forward 6 years, and we went from having 100% market share to less than 100% market share. And when we look at what's out there, like I used to go around conferences and find that everybody was using Infura on their hackathon projects. And then I see tweets saying, everybody in Ethereum relies on Infura. And I'd feel, we as a team would feel a little uncomfortable about that because we could see how reliant the ecosystem had become on us. So we weren't upset when other people started to emulate that model. There are many different alternative services now besides just Infura, and they're all great. They all offer slightly different flavors of what Infura provides. So is that decentralized enough? Some people feel like it is, and this talk is about how we could maybe approach it differently. Because there's limitations in the Web 2 model. Like all of these entities that I was just showing you pretty much emulate the model that we popularized with Infura, which is, be Web 2 for Web 3. You're not native Web 3, you're a Web 2 company building for the Web 3 ecosystem. And there's the same limitations that come with that. Like we've seen Google outages and other like FANG company product outages. No matter how large and significant your product is, it's really, really hard, if not impossible, to get 100% uptime with a centralized service. But you can't say the same thing for a peer-to-peer network in a true decentralized system. And the reason that this started to become important is because we always saw it as an option to run your own node. You could use Infura, you could run your own node, or you could use another provider. And that meant there was no vendor lock-in, no risk of fast-forwarding 20 years, and it's just an oligarchy of operators, maybe 2 or 3 that control the entire space. Because that would ultimately destroy the value that we're trying to create in the ecosystem. And the thing that complicated it, and the thing that kind of like made it click for us, was when we started to support many other networks and going multi-chain and seeing if somebody was willing to run their own node before, why would they run one of all 18 chains that they transact on? Nobody's going to do that. And so what's the decentralized alternative? Like, you can say light clients, and like light client research is fantastic, but even then you're still going to have to run 18 light clients to be able to support 18 chains if that's what you're using. So what's the path to decentralization? We want to do this and go down this path because it starts with collaborating and open sourcing a lot of what we do. Look at what happened with the Ethereum virtual machine innovation. Over the last few years, people have taken the EVM and made it their own, started to augment it, use it for different purposes, all of the different layer 2s that now have benefited from Geth. I love this meme, it's probably my favorite one. Imagine the same thing happening with node provider software. What if Infura open sourced a lot of what we do? And we debated that in the past, and we weren't really sure if it was the right thing to do. And now we think it is. Open network participation will make sure that this space will continue to innovate and grow, and that we're going to see, hopefully, an explosion of innovation built on top of the things that we're going to provide to the ecosystem. This is one I had to share, even though I cringe at it a bit. We've been thinking about decentralization for a long time. In early 2017, people weren't talking about liquidity pool mining and fractionalized NFTs. They were talking about utility tokens and ICOs. So we're like, okay, I guess that's how we decentralize. And so we had put together this mock-up before we became a paid service of you would go and like deploy a node, and then you're running your own node, and then maybe you shared that with the network, and it was going to get routed some requests, and then you would earn tokens for that by activating this mesh mode and earning Infura coin. It felt pretty cringy as we were designing it, so we gave up on that effort and said, you know what, let's just make sure MetaMask doesn't go down for now, and we'll try to revisit this in the future. So over the next couple years, we were thinking, well, what if we just started not with the perfect solution, we started with a federated network of providers? What would that look like? Like, who would the agents in that be? Like, how would it work? How would they interact? Like, could you switch between one and the other? If you're already developing applications, you can see that that's actually already started to happen. There are multiple providers. There's 6 or 7 that you might need to connect to support all of the different networks that are out there that Infura doesn't support. And then you're going to have to go and register with those, so now they have your personal information. You're going to have to sign up with a credit card, so now they have your credit card information. And you have a slightly different experience around all of that, and that's not ideal. But then once you have that, your client library, whether it's Ethers.js or Web3.js or something else, can do the routing in between those, and it feels like a seamless experience. But we can do better. So what if that was a decentralized network? Who are the actors in that decentralized network? There'd be a user that needs to interact with this network, and their traffic needs to go through what we call an ingress node, like that entry point, that gateway, that mainnet.infura.io type of endpoint. But then behind that, who's serving that traffic? Right now, the term in the industry is a node provider or an infrastructure provider. And they're going to need to provide that service in return for a reward. And then there needs to be some sort of status watcher that kind of reports the status of these things. Just like you want to know if Infura is down or if somebody else is down or degraded, that you can switch to something else. And that needs to be in this network. So the decentralized infrastructure network is what I'm here to talk about today. We don't typically talk about what we have that is not fully released, but that's one of the things that we're changing. Like, this is not yet complete. This is a journey that we're starting on, or that we started on 1.5 years ago, and it's something that we'll be releasing more information about at DevCon in a couple of weeks and over the next few months. But I want to start showing you the start of that work. So this is the decentralized architecture. All right. The network operators sit down there in the bottom. As you can see, Infura would be just one of these operators on the network. The things that we provide as a service would remain. Like, you would go to Infura.io, like anybody that still wants to use the traditional SaaS service that we provide, like, that's always going to exist. This is like an additional layer behind that. So other entities have shown that they are great at providing infrastructure services reliably. And there's a difference between incentivizing people to run a node and incentivizing people to serve RPC traffic at scale. And that was where we finally found what the problem that we wanted to solve. We don't want to incentivize people to run a node. We want to incentivize people to run Infura-like operations so that you end up with not just 1, 2, or 3, you end up with many different entities serving specific portions of traffic. Not everybody has to support the same network, not everyone has to support the same protocols, operate in the same regions of the world. It's up to the operator, just like staking and solo staking and other similar things. So the operators are there at the bottom. They start to emit capabilities to the network. If you're familiar with Dev P2P, it's talking about the same types of capabilities. What is it that I support as an operator? And these network watchers have that information and put it into an on-chain registry, which then can be used for the decision-making to be pushed to the client. By having the client make that decision-making, there's a few things that can happen. It can be, in my opinion, like purely decentralized in the way that the routing is handled, or there can be additional layers, so this ingress operator right here can act as another role on the network to simplify that user experience. You can think of the ingress operator as what Infura currently is, a fiat on-ramp into using the RPC network. We take credit card payments, we can take crypto payments, we can have like a more traditional seamless user experience so that you can have a traditional SaaS experience as an end user, but you can have the benefits of a decentralized network behind that, and it should be seamless to that user if they don't care about that. Or they can go the other path and be more aware of those details. So going quickly through this, the smart contract is deployed, registers the federated members initially until later on when we can improve that, coordinates the resource declaration and handles the payment and rewards. There'd be multiple providers there offering their services. The capabilities and capacity of the network would be able to be displayed at a given point based on the provider's information when they join the network. And then this ingress node is, again, optional as a way to make it easier for people to interact with multiple providers while still getting the same consistent experience that they would expect from a single node operator. So that user can pay the ingress node and get the API access, and that's like a Web 2 experience. I'm going to have to fast forward a bit because I'm running short on time, but this is that cocktail approach that I was talking about that people are already using, where the JSON RPC requests already get routed across multiple providers. And then the cool thing is that by having all of these providers monitored by these watchers, there can be federated status pages for this network. It's not something that you need to rely on creating your own information stream for. This is something that these ingress operators or even additional entities on the network can look at setting up to show the current state of the decentralized network. So that's the overview. That's what we've got right now. Like I said, this is heavily in active R&D. This is pretty much what I want to focus on full-time, aside from the day-to-day running of the Infura team. And we'll be talking more about it at DevCon 2. Sorry, DevCon 2 is where we started. What are we at now, 6? DevCon 6. To commemorate this, we're doing a POAP, of course. This is our first time doing a POAP at this event. So please come find me or somebody else from the Infura team and claim the Infura Decentralized Network POAP. All right. Thank you, everyone.